Hello friends and welcome. I'm Sara Lihz and I have two cards for you today that I'm so excited about. We are going to make some Where's Waldo inspired shakers. I think I may be showing my age on this one, but I love this. And really, it's a method. You can do this with all kinds of different themes and different products, but I do really love the two cards we're going to make today. So here's just the base shaker. Look at that. On the inside, there is a little blue onesie. You could use this for a gender reveal card if you wanted to. So we're starting with the Hey Diddle Diddle stamp set that I colored off screen just to save us some time. But we're going to make a circle card. So I arranged my stamped images and I traced around the outside of my 4 1/4 inch circle just so I have a sense of how much background I need. I'm using blues and purples. It's a baby card, sort of a gender neutral baby card. And so I'm starting with Shaded Lilac for the moon. It's the lightest of my shades and I'm using oxides. If you're uncomfortable ink blending, oxides are a really great option. I think of them sort of like oil pastels, right? They stay wet and creamy and they're really easy to blend together. So I added some Uncharted Mariner around that, but I covered up too much of the purple. So I just came right back in. These are domed foams with my blender. And I was able to lay more of that Shaded Lilac right on top. And I love that about these inks. Just around the very outside edge, I'm bringing in some Chipped Sapphire. It's my darkest blue, just to give a little bit of drama, a little bit of interest. And then I am using some shimmery watercolor. I just added some water and I'm using a small paintbrush so I get really small splatters. And that finishes my background. I did heat set that off camera sort of to help the paint dry, but also because those oxides really need a little help drying. And then I'll bring in my stamped images one more time to make sure I'm cutting out my circle exactly how I want it. I'm going to use a circle shaker. That's a circle shaker pouch. They're from Trinity. They have them in a couple sizes, but this one's for a 4 1/4 inch circle. And I take my sticky tape and I go around the outside edge of the back of my circle and I just let that tape sort of fold as it needs to create a circle. It's not going to matter to the tape and it's far easier than lots of little pieces. Once I get that tape added all the way around, I will remove the little piece of film that's on my shaker pouch, and I'm going to make sure I get that circle nice and centered. Then I'm going to remove the backing from that tape, except for a little patch kind of at the top. I prefer at the top. Technically, it could be anywhere, but I'm aiming for the top. Then I'll push down 4 prongs at north, south, east, and west, one on each side, just to make sure that everything stays centered. There is a little bit of wiggle room in there. And so I find if I just start pushing prongs down, all of a sudden things are a little cattywampus. Then it's easy enough to go around and just with my fingers or my thumbs, once I remember that I'm right-handed, here we go. It's pretty quick. I go 2 at a time and I just press them into the adhesive. I left the backing paper on at the top because otherwise I just get excited and I go ahead and I push down all the prongs and then I don't have any shaker bits and nobody wants that. For most of my shaker mix, I'm using this Candy Cottage embellishment mix and it is pastels and stars and shimmery little things and it's really subtle. I love this paired with that blended background. Then this is a piece of shrink plastic. I think mine is Shrinky Dink brand, but I also have Graphics shrink plastic and I think one other brand. They really all kind of work the same. And I'm going to color on this with an alcohol marker. It's a really pale blue. Like it's hard to pick it up on camera, but that ink color intensifies when you shrink it down. So just keep that in mind or maybe do a test piece if you're not sure about your color choices. There are 2 Trinity sets that have a onesie. The Spin Cycle, that is this laundry set that I love, and the Ribbon Rosette baby add-on. I actually want the smaller one, and that comes from Spin Cycle, but either one would work. And I'm going to put that die through my die cutting machine with that shrink plastic, and here it is. I also have my waffle flower stencil mat that is heat resistant. Any heat resistant surface will work, and a stamping block. Any like heavyweight flat surface will work. I'm kind of folding this back so that you can see, but also so I can. And I am closing it up where my fingers are because my heat gun is blowing that all over the place. Then as soon as I take the heat off it, I'm going to put that stamping block on top of it to flatten it out. And that's it. I have this teeny tiny little onesie that's a very pale blue. It coordinates beautifully with that shaker mix. Here it is. And when I put that in there, it just looks like it's part of it. And so I am going to go ahead and dump that inside of my little circle shaker pouch. And then I try to flatten out all of those sequins. That's what I'm doing here. And then I will remove that backing paper and close everything up. I just think you get a better seal on it if everything's really flat when you do that. Again, you could do this for any theme, any occasion, right? Just color your shrink plastic so it's going to coordinate with whatever your shaker mix is. You could make the shaker any shape or size that you want. I did a circle one because I love that. I just think it's fun and a little bit different, but you could do an A2 and that works too. I'm going to bring in my stamped elements and lay them over the top. And my friends, it was only after I glued down the moon and then I started working on the cow that I realized my moon is upside down. If you look at where the craters are and the shadows on the craters, like it should go the other way. But I wasn't pulling it back up. I wasn't starting over. And actually, I don't know that many people will notice if I don't tell them. So shh, don't tell anybody. I'm going to add my cow so that he is like part way over the moon here. And then we can work on our sentiment. So this is the Simply Sentimental Baby die set. There's a coordinating stamp and die set. And I love that the die set will cut out the stamped images, or you can add on like the die cut word. And that's what I'm going to do with this baby. It's really thin and delicate. So I just tap that off on the back of my hand. You could use scratch paper to remove some of that excess glue so it's not oozing out and making a big mess. The coordinating stamp set has a bunch of sub-sentiments or like little sentiments you can put right before it. We're going to do Hello Baby. I'm going to show this to you, but actually I'm going to change my mind later and I'm going to show you how I fixed it. So I'm just stamping with some navy ink on lavender, and then I will trim that out into a tiny little rectangle. This is the circle shaped card, and I just used it to cut my card base, but it has all the pieces you need to turn it into a shaped card donut. And then there's another tiny die set you can add on to make a pizza. It's super great. When I put my shaker over the card base, it covers it up entirely, and I decided I wanted more contrast. So I'm adding this with more tape around the outside and then glue in the middle to a 4.5-inch circle. This is totally optional. It is going to mean I need a slightly bigger envelope, but I liked the contrast enough that that was worth it to me. To add my shaker onto the card base, I'm using some temporary tape, mint tape, at the top of my shaker and at the top of the back of the card base. That way I get them lined up perfectly and I don't have things kind of off center or tilted too far one direction or the other. And then I can just remove them and everything's exactly where it needs to be. I opened up the card base to make sure I knew exactly where the bottom was when I went to add my sentiment. So again, it will look straight on the card. A little wet glue behind the baby and then more wet glue behind the hello. I'm using Nuvo Deluxe adhesive, which I find works pretty well when you're working with slick surfaces or acetate. If you're using a different glue, you might try letting it dry just a little bit before you add it to the acetate. That will help it grab on better so it's not just hydroplaning across your card. I am going to add this Oh My Stars mix on top of the acetate to kind of coordinate with what's going on inside the shaker. And I just put a little glue on a silicone mat and I'm picking it up with my pickup stick because I just need the tiniest little bit and I don't want it oozing out. Some of those stars are really small. And then I just pick them up with the wax end of my tool and I'm good to go. I've decided I want my Hello Baby in white on black, and then I want this Hey Diddle Diddle, Someone New, Someone Little. It's the same stamp set that I got my cow and my moon from. Never mind that I'm about to stamp welcome, right? I will fix it later. But I'm just going to stamp that onto some black cardstock. I've added my anti-static powder tool. And then I'm pressing very gently. I like my pressure tool for this so I don't accidentally squish those letters and they get a little chunky or distorted. I'm going to heat set that with my heat tool and being really careful. White embossing powder for me sometimes overheats and kind of melts into the paper. So as soon as it turns glassy, I quit. And then here, I'm going to take my pickup stick, which is my #1 Fix-It tool, and I am just going very gently from all of the sides underneath that purple cardstock to remove it. It helps that part of it was on acetate, so that part comes up pretty easily, but I was able to save the moon as well. Then I can add my new sentiment right over the top, and it's like it never happened. I'm going to add just the Hey Diddle Diddle onto the top. I felt like I needed a little something in that space, and I love this sentiment. The wording, the font, the fact that there are dies that will bubble cut around this, and it's perfect. I love it so much. I will say I cut it out of some scrap paper first and kind of laid it over the top of my stamped and heat embossed sentiment and kind of taped it on there. And then I was able to pop the die in kind of like a puzzle piece, and I knew that my spacing was going to be just perfect. I'll put the other part of the sentiment on the inside, and that, my friends, will finish up our card. It's cute and whimsical, it shakes, and it has that hidden onesie in there. It might just be something fun to search for, but it could also be a really awesome gender reveal card, and I just think there are so many possibilities for this. When we move on to card number 2, we're going to switch things up a little bit. Inside this one, there is a cow. We have breaking news. There is a cow on the loose. I love all the cute things from this release that are in this card, but we're also going to use some old stuff. So this is the cell phone mini slimline die from Trinity, and I've got some white cardstock that is just a little bigger than that, and we're going to use this cow print stencil. If you have been paying attention to any of my videos, I am obsessed with this thing. It is the best. The contrast, the whimsy of it. So I'm going over the whole thing with some black pigment ink to make sure it's super black. And then when I peel off that stencil, I will take my heat tool to it just to make sure that it's really, really dry and that I'm not going to smear it. I cut that down to 3 inches by 6 inches. The stencil is not quite 6 inches, and that's okay, right? Part of this is going to be hidden by the frame, and then I'm going to take my corner rounder to it. If you don't have a corner rounder, it's easy enough to just put it behind that frame and use your scissors to round those corners. This stamp set is called Local Programming, and we're going to use the news anchor set, but there's also some kind of game show and a cooking show. It coordinates with this retro TV that came out. I'll link it below. It's super cute. You can make it into a gift card holder, and I love it. But I stamped and colored this ahead of time. I'm going to fussy cut around the top. There aren't a lot of crazy angles. It doesn't matter. I am not a great fussy cutter. So I like to draw a very light pencil line around whatever I'm cutting out so that I make sure all those margins are equal. And then I just go slowly. I go really slowly and I move my paper instead of my scissors. But that's it, right? Nothing major, nothing difficult. I just cut around the top. So that will be at the very bottom of our shaker, and our bits can kind of hide behind that. And then up above that will be all of the chaos. So I'm getting everything lined up so I know where to cut off the bottom of that white cardstock, and I'll just trim around it with my pencil. Then I'm going to take it to my trimmer to make sure that I get really nice straight edges, and I'll round the corners just like I did with the other piece. I'll check the fit one more time, and then I'm going to bring in 2 pieces of acetate, 3x6 rounded corners. I'm adding my black frame for the cell phone on top of one of those pieces of acetate. This piece is optional. You do not need this piece, but I liked the idea of it looking like the news anchors, whatever was happening, was behind a screen. So that is the entire purpose of this first piece of acetate, is just to make it look a little bit more like it's on a phone. The second piece of acetate is what will enclose the shaker bits. So again, you could skip everything I just did and go straight to this part. I am going to glue my news scene onto the bottom of the second piece of acetate. All right, this is going to be on top of all that shakery goodness. When I add my glue, I'm careful to add just a thin layer, and then when I push to smooth everything down, I push towards the middle or towards the outside, so I'm not going to end up with glue oozing onto the acetate. The cell phone die also has some really great accessories like all these buttons, and they're pretty quick and easy to put together. The first time I did this, I didn't do it like this. I did it the long, hard way. So hopefully this is helpful for you. I cut out that back black piece, and then I cut out the button piece inside of it. So I knew exactly where everything was supposed to fit, and I wasn't struggling to get the buttons straight. Then I can just add glue and very quickly inlay all of those pieces. When I go to add this piece, it's going on top of the top piece of acetate, okay? Because those are going to go on the top of the phone. If you didn't have that acetate, you'd just be gluing them to the cardstock where the news anchors are. Then I'm grabbing this breaking news. This is also in the local programming with the news anchors. And then this is the carton companion. This is so hilarious, my friends. There are two of these little sentiments you can choose from. We're using last seen entering the laundromat on Washington Boulevard. We suspect a sole perpetrator in this case. If found, please contact the local authorities. And it's so funny. The other one says, last seen with a suspicious looking dish on the night the cow jumped over the moon. Anyone with information should contact the local authorities. Oh my gosh, I just lost it when I read those. And that's really what inspired both of these cards. I want this cow head to be our missing cow, and it's going to be our shaker bit. I'm using StazOn ink. It's a solvent-based ink. You need something like StazOn to do this. And I'm stamping it onto that shrink plastic again, okay? I'll press firmly. I typically only get one shot at this. For my missing cow sentiment, I cut the die out with some scratch paper, just printer paper, and then you can see that die fit like a puzzle piece in there because it has a very thin margin. Then I used one of the speech bubbles from the cell phone die for breaking news. And then to cut through that shrink plastic, I put a piece of heavyweight cardstock behind it. I would also recommend cutting into your plate instead of your magnetic shim if you're using the same kind of die cutting machine I am. A lot of times I have better luck that way. So I colored in the news part of breaking news in some red, and then I'm going to give it a drop shadow. I cut the exact same piece out of black, and it's going to show up just sort of down and to the right. I did the same thing with my missing cow sentiment. This is mostly because that cow pattern in the background is sort of busy, and then there's going to be all these shaker bits. And I wanted to make sure that these stood out a little bit more. So here are all of my layers, and I'm going to take my news anchors and I'm going to set it on top. If you didn't have the second piece of acetate, you could skip that. It would already be on top. I'll use my wet glue again to add these. I'll tap them off on the back of my hand just to remove any of the excess. I don't want that glue oozing out. I get this far in and I start panicking that something's gonna go wrong. But this card is totally worth it. I would love to know which of these two is your favorite because it might, I don't know. It's sort of this one, but then the other one with the ink blending. Let me know what you think. To make sure everything lays really nicely, I cut a second frame and then I just trimmed off the bottom where I already have cardstock from the news anchors. That way this top frame will lay very flat along that. It's not altogether necessary. It's just one of those finishing details that I think makes it look really polished. I added a second frame because my sentiments are 2 pieces of cardstock thick and I didn't want the acetate to look like it was bowing. And then I will add my top piece that has my buttons and my optional layer of acetate. Little bit of wet glue around the outside. Again, if you're not using Nuvo, just give that a second to dry before you lay it on top, right? It'll thicken the glue a little bit. It's a little stickier. It works a little bit better. Then when I press down on this, I sort of push to the outside instead of to the inside. All right, it's time to shrink the cow. So I am folding up my heat resistant mat so there is no hole where my fingers are because there's hot air blowing, right? And I don't want him to escape. I'm going to keep that heat on him until he is as small as he's going to get, and then just a second longer, and then I will stamp on him with my acrylic block. He was away from the heat for longer than I liked, so I hit him one more time with the heat tool, okay? If you don't do that, it might be fine, but sometimes it's not fine. Sometimes I end up with this weird divot in my shrink plastic, so just a heads up on that. I grabbed all the embellishments, everything I could find in black and white and red. I couldn't help myself. So we're starting with sparkle spots, black ones and white ones. And then I have black and white confetti that is wafer thin and opaque. And I love that. They're just called black dots and white dots. And then I'm adding the ripe berries confetti mix in there for just a pop of red. I love all of the sort of layers of red popping through in different places. I know not all of us have black foam tape, so I'm using white foam tape, and I just went around the sides with my black alcohol marker. Heads up, it doesn't dry that fast on foam tape, and so I end up with it all over my hands. I just use some hand sanitizer to take that off, and I removed the release paper from both sides of that foam to help wrap it around those corners. I have foam all the way around the edge, and then I created a shelf at the bottom. It goes edge to edge so that my shaker bits don't get completely lost down at the bottom. You don't have to shake as hard for things to pop up. When I go to add my cow, I'm making sure that his face is facing outward. I have already removed all of the backing paper because I am not lucky with these things. And every time I remove the release paper, things go flying. Then I hold it in my hand so I can sort of line up 3 of those sides just with my fingers before the tape touches. And then I'll lay everything flat and press down. I'm going over the edges a little bit with a black marker just to clean up any place where I have white cardstock showing that I think would detract from the final look. I have a 6x6 piece of cardstock that I folded in half using my bone folder, and then I rounded the corners again, and that's my card base. I will just lay my card right on top and press very carefully so I'm not crushing the center where I don't have anything supporting that acetate. And there's my little cow, my breaking news, my missing cow, and you can find him if you shake the card right. Those are our 2 cards for today. I would love to know which of these 2 is your favorite, and if you have ideas for your own Where's Waldo inspired shaker. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you next time.